Hello, everybody. This is the second edition.
There's an ad. There's an ad.
This is the second edition of Let's Talk Politics. Today we'll be discussing the concept of Brexit, whether the British government should push for a hard or soft Brexit. And here we have an array of students who are interested in the topic and have a strong stance on the issue. And we'll go around introducing our participants today. So we have Ollie.
Hi, I'm Ali Lode, Junior.
And what's your stance?
So my stance is pro-leave.
Ah, okay. And we have Saqib. Saqib.
Hi.
Yep.
I'm for Brexit, so I'm just putting it out there.
Okay. And we have Josh.
Yeah, hello. I'm also pro Britain leaving the EU.
Oh, wow. Okay. And we have Priyankar.
I am for Britain leaving the EU, but I think this is the wrong time.
Okay. And we have Rahul.
Hey, I am for Britain leaving the EU.
Okay. And Rohan.
A Lamau.
And Rohan.
I'm Rohan, and I'm for Remain.
Perfect. Since that we have quite an imbalance of perspectives, I'll be taking the Remain side, as personally that is my stance as well.
Well, I personally believe in Remain at the moment, so in many areas I will be taking.
Okay, well, so we'll keep that in mind as well. So, one of the main things that have been brought up the past weeks and debates in the Parliament have been whether Britain should go for a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit. And, you know, the Brexit is inevitable and it has to happen. But obviously, how will it take place? So I'm just posing it out there. So should Britain go for a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit? And what implications might follow that?
Well, I mean, if nobody else has anything that they would like to say, I think Britain needs to go hard. That's bad, but Britain cannot just lackadaisically leave because there already is going to be attempts to punish them, and there's no sense in them trying to do it halfway. If they're doing something as one could put as irrational as this, they should go all the way and just try to say, you know what, we don't need the EU. We're fine without it. And I think if they can do that successfully, it could lead to other countries saying, well, maybe we don't need the EU either.
Nigel.
Yes.
Nigel, if you mind if I interrupt for just a second. Kai Suharon is asking if you can take if you will be taking questions from viewers of the live stream.
We will be, but not right now.
Not right now. Okay.
Not right now. Yeah. So Priyankar, you were about to say something, or?
So when it comes to Brexit, I think that at the moment, because in my opinion, the entire election, or the referendum rather, was very poorly timed, but it has to go for a soft because it's just 2 years after the Scottish referendum, and Nicola Sturgeon said that if we go hard, there will be a Scottish independence.
Correct.
I think that if we go for a hard Brexit, that the SNP will call for it. And a lot of people in Scotland, from what I've read, say that they're very shocked by the level of racialism that's behind the Brexit movement. They're really shocked by how they're really not tolerant. And of course, Scotland voted 62.9 or 63% in favor of stay. So there are certainly implications to that, and that a hard Brexit could be disastrous for the union.
And that's a good point because
if I may address that.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So I think that yes, there would be probably a Scottish push for independence again. Like you said, just 2 years after the prior one. And personally, but the thing is that they need approval from the PM, from Parliament to do that sort of thing. That David Cameron gave approval for the Scottish referendum in the same way that he gave approval for the Brexit referendum. And honestly, there's no prospect for Scotland outside the EU, and I think at some point they have to realize. There's no prospect for Scotland outside of the UK, and I think at some point they have to realize that, because even if theoretically Scotland left the UK and tried to join the EU, chances are they would be blocked by Belgium and Spain, seeing as they have their own secessionist movements, and they don't particularly want to give those movements the idea that they can leave the nation and then join the EU and take advantage of the benefits that come with it.
I mean, I don't want to interrupt or anything, but then I think a Belgian who's the chief Brexit negotiator, Guy Verhofstadt, I'm getting the pronunciation right, he's in favor of Scotland staying in the European Union. So I think that there is still a substantial risk of it happening, and while Spain may be a bit on the fence about the matter, remember they still are in a way. Well, they certainly aren't legitimate. They don't have the legitimacy to have, say, pre-2010. So, I mean, open for discussion, but I don't want to speak too much. So, go ahead.
I mean, when
yeah,
the EU.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. No, it's good.
Yes.
You want to speak before?
We'll go with Sakib. We'll go with Sakib.
Oh, okay.
All right. Just one thing I want to bring up is that about the EU is that I think, especially with England leaving and all these big countries having debt crises, the EU is becoming, even if Scotland, let's say they do hypothetically leave the UK and they try to join the EU, I don't think Spain really will be in any position to block them, seeing as like the amount of debt and scrutiny which they receive in the EU now, as well as and Belgium. I don't know too much about Belgium, but
I mean, Belgium is an indebted country, but it's not like Spain.
yeah.
I think if I could add, I think it's fundamentally sort of important to sort of understand and sort of categorize and define what exactly Brexit was. Was it purely a racist right-wing movement sort of supported by bigots and people who were xenophobic and sort of nativist, or was it a larger sort of discontent with the existing prevailing order?
I think yeah. I mean, I think it's good that you bring that up because when it came to the referendum, I think there was a lack of understanding of what the EU was. I think the sentiment was there that Britain is isolationist. I mean, not isolation, but they're isolated from the rest of Europe.
Yeah,
and that Europe is the source of
Right. That never.
And allow me to speak. And it's a source of migrants, a source of refugees, a source of people that are not British. And I think that was the problem. And you see this with what happened. We're getting feedback here. Sorry. So what happened here was that after the election or the referendum, the top searched word in Google was the European Union, and people were asking what is the European Union right after they cast the vote. And I think there's a great deal of misinformation, especially in the referendum, and also a great deal of populism.
Yeah,
there's people are like, take control of our borders back, but are they really genuinely taking control of their borders back? I don't think so.
Yeah, and I think sort of fundamentally it's sort of economic hardship and those sort of economic conditions that have produced sort of this right-wing backlash. And I mean, we're seeing that all over on both sides of the Atlantic with Donald Trump. And then various right-wing leaders rising again in Europe, Marine Le Pen in France, Noberhofer in Austria. I mean, it's a repeat of what happened in the 1930s, post sort of the Great Depression. And you see sort of the rise of the right and people becoming extremely sort of isolationist.
And I was
Also,
I was
also what I wanted to add to the whole populism thing is I think the Brexit campaign, the two main guys, Farage and Johnson, were somewhat unprepared for the prospect of Britain actually leaving the EU. So Johnson decided not to run for prime minister. Farage gave up his leadership of UKIP. And they basically, in my view, what that showed is a lack of preparation on their part and a lack of foresight of, God, we actually left the EU.
Do you think they did that just because they wanted to get the discussion out and not because they actually thought it was going to happen? Or do you think it was just a genuine not knowing what they were doing?
On the part of Johnson, Boris Johnson, and this is what my brother Rohan thinks as well. We think that it was he's the former mayor of London, and you don't get to be the former mayor of London by being politically retarded. And so Rohan suspects
other than that haircut,
Boris Johnson put himself out there in an attempt to become prime minister. of the Conservative Party, and that's what he did with his bid for the leadership. Unfortunately, Michael Gove backstabbed him, and we ended up with Theresa May instead. I do not think that Boris Johnson was an actual proponent of leave. I think Nigel Farage was. I think the part he played was motivating the sort of racist, nativists, we need to take our country back sort of people.
Yeah.
But it was though, wasn't it?
Did a better job
I'm looking back. I'm looking at the comment section right now, and we're seeing people. We have Kai Suherwan saying that we're about to enter the Hitler realm when we're going to start comparing things to Hitler. But I think it's important that we recognize that there's a correlation and a similarity between what happened with Nazi Germany and their views on. But no, I mean obviously the circumstances were different, but we need to look into. We need to look. I mean, can we speak one at a time? And I'd really like to talk on this because we have a lot of people who are pro Brexit here. Is that the issue here? Is that back in Nazi Germany's good old days, right? You had people saying, no, we're gonna leave the League of Nations. We're not gonna follow any of the rules. Why? Because we don't want our sovereignty to be taken away from us and whatnot. Rightfully so. I mean, true, they were being bullied by the League of Nations, but is the European...
That's an understatement.
That's an understatement that they were being bullied? They were, right?
No, I mean, it's an understatement as in, like, it was so much worse. I mean, Germany was absolutely hammered after the war in terms of debt.
Of course,
I mean, they started the war.
I think their main...
but you gotta look at
this. Germany is... Okay, sorry.
No, but I mean, the thing is, then you have people seeing Brussels as a location where policies are being passed that are being forced down the throats of the UK. But in reality, we need to look at this in a different mindset. The reality is that politics isn't divided by a right or left. It's openness and being closed-minded now, and people who are afraid of globalization, people who are afraid of giving up sovereignty for the greater good of an entire continent and the prosperity of an entire continent, that is selfishness, and that is complete
Okay, Nigel.
populism. And that's what I have to say about that. Okay. I think the benefits of saying the EU has greatly outweighed the benefits of leaving the EU, and just putting it out there.
Okay. All right. Personally, there never was the sort of same pro-centralized Europe, centralized government sentiment in Britain as there was in Europe. Like in Europe, you'll go to Germany, you'll see the German flag flying right alongside the EU flag, and you don't have that in the UK. So first of all, you have to understand that there isn't that much of a cultural connection between Britain and the European continent. They don't feel like they're the same people. And secondly,
that's completely true. Right. That is completely true. Yeah.
And so the next thing is that, like, you would argue that yes, we have to sacrifice globalization for. I mean, we have to sacrifice sovereignty for globalization. I like globalization. I think there should be a free, open market. I support that kind of thing. But the EU, to me, was a terrible way to go about that. Like, if it just been a single market with economic regulation, that would be fine. But instead, the EU started delving into political projects. Like, it just recently, they've come up with a centralized army. Rahul, they have been legislating certain things from Brussels, such that, like, laws in the UK, including the Human Rights Act, give a lot of power to the EU. And I think that we can maintain our political sovereignty while conceding some of our economic to provide the best opportunity for us and the people around us.
Rahul, on the topic of preposterous EU terrible EU policies, and Nigel brought up openness and globalization. How does Dublin II aim to do that in any way? If, for those of you who don't know, to summarize, Dublin II is basically an EU law where refugees, if they land in your country, they're not allowed to go to any other. They basically become your responsibility. They go on your head. So I mean, one of the big points which came up in the whole Brexit, that was correct, that was accurate, was that Dublin 2 essentially screwed whichever countries were nearest to wherever refugees were.
Britain only has pledged to take 10,000 refugees, so it's not like it's going to be a big problem for England.
Well,
Yeah.
but the topic of freedom of countries to act within what they within their
Yes, of
economic
course.
power and what they can or cannot do, Dublin 2 just doesn't work. And there are many other policies within the EU which really just screw over some countries and heavily help or go to the aid of others.
And I agree. And I think what we're all kind of getting at here is that the EU undoubtedly benefits small countries more than big countries. And big companies with big populations and a lot of money don't want to be told what to do as much because they don't need to be told what to do. So I think that was a big problem, and people were just fed up with these regulations. For example, like the EU took some things way out of proportion. The restriction on cabbage sales for the EU is 44,000 pages, and it's just some of the things they did was incredibly not necessary. And I think UK or Britain, I'm not sure which one's politically or correct.
The UK to refer to the state.
Yeah, okay. So the UK just was tired of that, and it was a culmination of other issues such as the cultural divides and the open borders. But I think it's just because economically, in a sense, or just politically in a sense, it didn't benefit them as much as the people didn't like it, if that makes any sense.
Right, but I think even though the EU was becoming increasingly political, like Rahul said, and how the EU was turning into like more of a country, I think Britain had the right agreement sorted out such that it took all the economic benefits of the free trade agreement and the single market while also not being held liable to too much of Brussels bureaucracy. They could keep control of their currency. They could exempt themselves from the Schengen area. And so I think a lot of the fears that the Brexit camp had about things like immigration and all that stuff was frankly unfounded because I think they had the right relationship with the EU to start with.
I think that the key issue with the European Union, am I interrupting?
No, go for it.
It's actually not so much in the fact that it's actually not very successful as it used to be, maybe. So as far as I've studied, I personally am a very big. I love history personally, and I've always looked at the past to kind of find out just the present. And in the 1950s, the European Union was founded in a way with the Treaty of Rome and then the Poland Steel Agreement. And then they started putting up these protectionist barriers, didn't they? And then ever since they had to dismantle them because of the WTO, ever since then, it effectively made the European Union's exports less competitive because they were simply not good compared to the way that foreign exports were. And ever since, perhaps with the exception of, say, Germany, very few other EU nations, all the indebted nations today didn't export what they should have exported. That they should have otherwise exported. And as a result, the European Union has become much, much more sluggish economically. And when you have economic troubles, it immediately translates to social issues because people who do not, because it's not like everyone will understand economics. It's a very difficult subject, something that it's very difficult for people to grasp how somehow a financial crisis occurs, somehow your nation finds itself much poorer than it should have been. And then the big question mark comes when they say, well, who could be responsible for it, not what is the root cause of it. And then the problem that they see is, and of course, these refugees, so that they think are taking up their jobs. And I think that's a central problem. And I think a central problem I see is in the fact that Europe in the long term hasn't been very economically stable. And this isn't just 2010 I'm talking about, or 2008. I'm talking about way, way, way back. Many, many, many decades ago. It's a long-term process that I think the EU is having to deal with and rectify after ages and ages.
Yeah,
I'd say-
good point to bring up.
Oh, sorry, Ali, you haven't spoken. Go.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the fundamental flaw in the EU project, and as I'm sure many of you read Joseph Stiglitz and his sort of insights into the topic, and so it was that there was sort of the attempts at economic integration without sort of the sort of accompanying political integration. And so I think sort of throughout Europe there's that sort of disaffection amongst sort of the populace and sort of the frustration towards sort of the so-called faceless Brussels bureaucrats who are making decisions increasingly that they feel are not in their favor. And I think this sort of crisis, if you may call it, was in the brewing over the last 50 years, sort of ever since the 1970s, and you saw that shift in the Keynesian paradigm, sort of towards what we call sort of a neoliberal world order today. And sort of the rules shifted. I mean, the sort of advocates of this current ideology, they'll say, oh, there was deregulation of the deregulation of sort of financial sector, when instead it was actually simply re-regulation, right? And so you embedded within a different set of institutional structures, you shift sort of the power arrangements, and then you have a large sort of swath of the populace who are suffering economically because of it.
And Ali, I just want to ask the group a question. We put us in direction. Is that proponents from the EU, which it cannot gain otherwise through use of treaties and deals with other countries?
I'm not sure if that was just me, but I feel like a large portion of your question just dropped.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you please repeat the question?
Oh, did it drop? Oh, Jesus. Okay. Is it stable now?
It seems like
It seems to be, yes.
Okay. What I wanted to ask is that proponents for Britain staying in the EU, could they please try to elaborate on, in the long term, what will Britain lose from getting out of the EU, which it can't gain back through trade deals, through negotiations, through treaties?
G6, NATO.
Like what will Britain lose if they leave the EU?
Yeah, like what do you guys? What are your main,
a lot
points?
of things. I think the first and most foremost important thing, a lot of people, when the Leave campaigners, they said, "Oh, we should leave the EU because Turkey's about to join the EU, and that's going to be a big problem. We're going to have a Muslim country, which is technically secular. We're going to have a middle, technically, but a Middle Eastern country joining the European Union, even though they're not European, and then." The reality is, when you leave the EU, you're leaving the negotiating table. You're leaving the negotiating table. If you want to continue to work with the EU, then you're going to have to accept all the regulations, all the trade agreements without having a say on them. And I think that weakens Britain's power, and Britain's power has been waning since the end of the Second World War, and it is a disappointment to see Britain's power continue to diminish in the world today. And I think that is the greatest mistake of the British people, the greatest mistake that Britain's ever done ever since the bombing of Dresden. But anyways,
the bombing of Dresden. Sorry.
The thing is, so though people may say they can go back and work with Commonwealth countries, they can work with the United States and have their own trade agreements and all that. But when it boils down to who are your neighbors, who are people that are easier to work with, it would be Europe. And in many cases, because Britain was the UK is a English-speaking country, a lot of American companies invested and set up shop in Britain and London so that they could continue to expand into Europe. But now with Brexit underway, that's not going to be easy for these American businesses. That's not going to be easy for these businesses that are actually paying taxes to the British government, and that's only going to create more economic difficulties for Britain.
Right.
And
I want to continue on the topic of trade, because I think that the EU is going to be Britain's largest trading partner no matter what, given the proximity, given the size of economies like Germany and such. But I think when the Brexit camp said, yeah, we'll renegotiate trade deals, it's easier said than done, because just yesterday I read that the EU and Canada were working on a trade deal for about the last 7 years. And under EU law,
the Canadian model, yeah, I've heard of it.
Under EU law, it has to be a unanimous vote to agree on a trade deal. But Wallonia said no, and they have to go back to the negotiating table. Now, in Britain's case,
excuse me, who said no? I couldn't hear that.
Wallonia.
Wallonia. Thank you.
So, and now they have to go back to the negotiating table. This is 7 years on.
Yeah, and
For
Britain seems to be saying the same thing. Britain will take years and years for them to negotiate trade deals.
And for Britain, a lot of EU countries are already very angry at the fact that they left, and so it's going to be Britain that's going to need to accommodate to the EU's needs, and not the EU is not going to budge an inch for Britain. So I think whatever trade deal that the British get, even if they get one, is going to be much, much, much worse than the agreement that they had before Brexit.
I mean, I personally agree with that because I think that the discussions they will have will be very politicized because, I mean, the French election, I believe, will be next year, right? And
Yeah.
and of course, there's a rising chance that the second runoff of that election will be between the FN and Alain Juppé of the right wing part, the center right wing party in France, and they obviously want to try and reduce the proportion of the FN's vote. They want to reduce its sway over the population. So I think that there are other such, and make sure that the Eurosceptic parties know that if you leave the European Union, you're going to suffer really bad. I think there is that kind of politicizing aspect of it that will become very, very predominant in the negotiations.
Correct. And I think that's one of the difficulties that Britain's going to face. And so whether Britain's going to push for a hard Brexit, which is, the sentiment is that they probably are, then it's going to be irreversible. The referendum is already irreversible, and going straight for Brexit, hard Brexit, that's going to be even more irreversible in the long run.
All right. If I may deviate us for a second, let's talk about French politics for a second here. How do you think prospects for Britain would be changed regarding if Marine Le Pen comes to power and France has its own referendum? What do you think the political climate would be like regarding their own referendum? And let's say in a magical world where France has its own referendum and actually manages to succeed in the same way that Britain did.
The EU would hurt.
What prospects? How would that level in the negotiations?
I mean, the French people. I mean, a lot of people in Europe are hurting right now over the fact that a lot of people believe that Germany is really the main benefactor of the EU.
Of the EU, yeah.
Yeah, because it's Germany which gains the most from free movement of goods, services, persons, and capitals, and they also gain the most from the euro because the fixed exchange rate of the euro has allowed them to go and export without harm of a rising currency. And Germany are really the only country which are still doing well in the EU right now, and that's no coincidence. It's not just because the Germans are more hardworking or anything like that. It's that over time they've grown in power, they've grown in prominence, and they've slowly crafted EU policies so that they benefit the most, and people are seeing that now. So to go back to your topic, to your question about what the French people will do, what they will say, well, it wouldn't be an unfair assumption to believe that they would want out as well. And what would happen to the EU?
Exactly.
I think
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think to Sakib's point, so in terms of how the EU was designed, so this designed economically and sort of the single currency, and sort of this maintaining a strong currency. I mean, we're sort of seeing the implications of that today, and I think this whole sort of fiscal discipline and all that is an extremely sort of negative economic sort of mechanism. And
when it my interrupting.
No, please go. If there's silence, just speak.
All right, so my opinion, there are several things. First, when it comes to the single currency, I mean, in France, the French will obviously harken back to like the same way that Americans tend to harken back to the 1950s. There was greater regulation of financial services, and they're saying, well, we didn't have a financial crisis on the scale since we had that.
Right.
A lot of French might harken back to say Trente Glorieuses, the 30 years of almost uninterrupted economic growth followed the Second World War. And then when you get into the EU, what happened? Obviously, it seems like I personally don't feel that it's truth, but then coincidence is going to be taken as correlation. And a lot of French voters, especially in a country that still has 10% plus unemployment, they will definitely take that into consideration when it comes to they cast their ballot.
Sorry, can you repeat your final point? Your voice kind of dropped for me.
Sorry about that. So then basically my point was that a lot of French are going to harken back to the 1945 to 1975 period of almost uninterrupted economic expansion in France, and say that, well, we were so good back then. Back then there was no European Union, or at least there wasn't a European Union as strong as there is right now, And then ever since we joined, what have we got? We've got years and years of flatlining economic growth. We have 10% plus unemployment. There's growing, and then of course there's
I think that's a very good point. The thing about that is, I'm not sure. I don't know if economic growth is France's biggest issue right now. I think French people are way more concerned about terrorism and refugees. I think down the line, it will become an issue, and French people, as any country and any citizen would see. I think your point about correlation and causation is not the same thing, but people tend to see it as that. And I think that will come out, but I don't know if that's going to come out this year or in 10 years. And I think there could be time to either change policies or it will get worse. And I think if it does get worse, France will definitely either try to leave or successfully leave. And I don't think we need to be in a fairy tale land to predict that France could foreseeably leave the EU. I think it is a real possibility in the next 15 years.
Josh, sorry, I'll let you go first.
If I know, go.
Okay. I was actually gonna put the mic on you because I was gonna say, Josh, you talked about how people are more scared about refugees right now. I mean, refugees and all that. I think you can link that to the current economic issues which are in France. Ali can speak a little bit more on it because he really looks at that in depth.
Yes.
I mean, I over the past 2 weeks, I've been writing a research report on how refugees are an economic benefit, and the one thing is that not Britain, sorry, but Europe as a whole is facing massive massive aging population, and most importantly, a working labor force that's diminishing as well. And refugees, the presence of refugees, if we just look at numbers, obviously, refugees are marginally a huge benefit to Europe.
Do people see it that way, though, Nigel?
But no, please let me address. Please don't be aggressive like that. People obviously don't see it as that, but it is the job of the politicians, the job of the people in power to utilize their authority as a means of conveying the realities and the impending crises that Europe may face if they do not accept these refugees and integrate them into society. And obviously, we'll have to do that in the right way.
Right.
I mean, what's happening? I mean, what's happening in France with like the burkini ban and all these and that? It does create this animosity that is definitely prevalent. But obviously, that is the constitutional culture of France. And these are things that are obviously going to be impossible to change, especially with the authority of Brussels. You can't change that. But in places like Canada, for example, where the government's able to say that these people are our friends, they're here to help. They're not here to they're here to help us build up our country, not here to destroy it. Then you can decrease that animosity. And that should be the job of the politicians. That should be the job of the EU. But of course, this is a discussion of Brexit. And when we come to talk about whether refugees are flooding, the borders of the UK, that's not true. That's not true at all. In the long run, as I said, migrants and migration, and the reason why there's been freedom of movement in Europe is because it allows economic growth to be fluid, and that has definitely been possible.
And what I want to say is that the UK is never the most refugee-friendly country in the EU.
No, not at all. Yeah.
They kept their borders, and if you want evidence of that, you don't have to look any further than the Calais jungle. All the people that want to come to the UK, but are really not being allowed to.
I mean, you look at the Second World War as well. They were reluctant to accept the Jews. They were reluctant to accept the French people.
Of course.
So because they're physically, geographically isolated, and that's how it reflects into the social views of the people.
And in the case for immigrants, what I'd say is I looked up some numbers, and I found out that if you look at immigrants that come from far overseas, places like India and China, who go there for good colleges, they take very, very good jobs, doctors, lawyers, businessmen. But if you look at EU immigrants, people who come from Poland and Eastern Europe, the jobs that they do are mostly concentrated in things like construction, manufacturing, domestic work, and agriculture, low-paying jobs that a lot of British people don't want to do, given that they come from an affluent society where they are educated and they don't want to do jobs like that. they don't want to work for that amount of money an hour, but those jobs need to be done.
Okay.
And so people who come to Britain to look for a job are willing to do them, whereas British people don't want to. And so I think that the argument that they are taking our jobs is not fully valid, because they're taking the jobs that British people have shown that they are not willing to do, so-called like blue collar jobs that are not really popular among the public.
Okay. All right. First of all, Rohan, I think you're actually somewhat wrong there regarding the immigration of people from India, from Asia, and the immigration of people from Poland. Yes, the people coming from Europe are predominantly service workers, but the idea that the people coming from India, from China, well, China I will concede, perhaps I'm not so familiar with their immigrating demographic, but India, that's not strictly true. In the UK, people coming from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they're usually service workers as well, and service workers, construction workers, people who, like, as the stereotype comes from, people who work in corner stores.
But is that really productive to bring up?
Usually they do well for themselves there, such that
Yeah,
they build themselves up, they give themselves a nice base, and the ethnic Indians who succeed in the UK are 9 times out of 10 UK-born Indians. They're not the Indian immigrants. And
Wait, but Rahul, is that really relevant to like talk about right now? I mean, I get that it was brought up, but
to sort of add to that, I think it's accepted, it's widely understood that the entire immigrant argument as a whole was sort of largely sort of constructed and not entirely false, and sort of constructed by that far rightist Leave campaign.
Okay, there was actually a point to what I was saying, and the point is that we don't have to look at the EU to get our service jobs or our manufacturing jobs. We can work with countries like India, like China, like Pakistan, like Bangladesh. Although I think we should, like, wherever we want to look, maybe even Latin America if things pan out that way. But like, the point is that that's not our sole source. Service jobs have been coming from India for years, and to say that Polish people, Romanians are the only people doing those kinds of jobs is false.
Okay. Let me clarify what I meant. I gave India and China as examples of sources of migration to the UK. What I meant was people who come from outside the EU, going to good colleges and taking good jobs. My point still stands, is that EU migrants are people who come from countries seeking any opportunity that they can get, not necessarily a great one. So the jobs that they take are jobs that British people don't want to do, the same way that in Singapore, the migrants who come from South India take the jobs that no one wants to do. They take the construction jobs, right? So I think it's important to realize the distinction between those two groups of migrants, and that the issue that the Brexit campaign was trying to solve of people taking our jobs, meaning well-paying, good British jobs, is actually not the right is actually the immigrants coming from outside the EU, not those coming from inside the EU.
People will blame immigrants for anything, though. It doesn't matter about facts. Look at America right now. Clearly, Latino immigrants are not taking all of our jobs, but when things go bad, immigrants are always the first ones to be blamed. That's how the world works.
Okay, I'm actually going to act as a mouthpiece for a second here. Prakrit wants to say that, like, he's also talking about how the people who get educated in Britain for the high-paying jobs are like doctors, that sort of thing. They don't go to work in the NHS.
Well, of course.
They go to work in the private sector. People from Romania who have a higher education will work for the British NHS. So Prakrit wants to point out that you'd be losing that source of
Yeah, no, and I wanted to bring that up, and that's one of my factors and reasons that I feel that leaving the EU is detrimental, because you have these skilled individuals who will come into work in the UK and who will work at lower wages, because compared to their home country, it's much higher. And when you remove the freedom of movement, you remove that opportunity, and you're going to have a great negative impact on the NHS.
The
NHS.
So
Why?
Nigel,
Sorry, continue, Ali.
Oh yeah. So in regards to sort of your pro Remain stance, what do you see sort of fueling the current sort of so-called populist rise and sort of right-wing rise we're seeing throughout Europe as well as in
Yeah.
the US?
I think the
Yeah.
rise in populism overall in this world has been channeled to right-wing parties, but where is the root of this? And I think and this hatred and this fear of globalization, which once was actually praised, I think is the reason behind that is because people have been losing out in globalization, and they don't feel that they are gaining from it, even though in the end their living standards have increased, they've doubled. It's got average GDP of countries have at least grown by a good by doubled since the 1970s or so. And when it comes to developed countries, of course, growth is going to stagnate. And when these countries and the people in these countries see China, or when they see India, or when they see Asian countries growing, is because less developed countries are bound to grow much faster than compared to their counterparts in Europe or in America and whatnot. And I think that's the mistake that the politicians have made, is in fact because they know that the only way to gain power, gain legitimacy, is by going against globalization. Then it's created more harm than good. And
so
yeah.
So is that sort of like a mistake of sort of the general populace who have sort of mistook the sort of current economic
correct, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I personally think that ever since, I think whenever I like to make a historical relation, I know it's very, very, I know the situation which we had since 2000 is a league away from what we had in 29, but for some countries it certainly has been the case where the conditions today are similar to what they were during the Depression. Spain still has an unemployment rate of more than 20%. Greece still has a youth unemployment rate of more than 50%. When you have these very sudden changes around you, the only place you see, that you think, the only people you think have solutions will be those who have the most radical ideas. You really move away from the political center. This happens very, very often.
Yeah, it's political instability causing social instability.
It goes against inefficient institutions. Like, I don't want to make a comparison with Germany in 1930 or something, but then the Reichstag was very, very inefficient. They didn't pass legislation correctly. They were still racked by these coalition governments. And maybe in the 1920s they were able to recover, but ever since then there's been no solid leadership. Similarly here, the EU Parliament remains rather fractious, with different elements that debate each other. And as we saw at CETA and Wallonia, the nature of the European Union's political structure makes it very difficult for legislation to pass. Therefore, the common mistrust with the politicians saying they really aren't doing anything.
Right, and with regards to what you said about Spain and Greece, I think factually that whole recession is mostly a cause of the euro, and how one currency cannot serve the needs of multiple countries at the same time. When Germany has got a growing economy and Greece, Spain, and Ireland have got failing economies, you cannot make one currency serve the needs of all of them at the same time.
Yeah, I think on paper that's good.
But like Josh said earlier, immigrants become the punching bag for everything, because whenever a person sees an immigrant who's doing better than them with a job, they always think that guy's not supposed to be here, right?
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, what globalization has turned into is not a celebration of technological achievement and global cooperation, but really just a hating on people who leave their own country to pursue opportunities elsewhere.
And I think that there's sort of very legitimate and sort of sensical sort of economic realities that are behind this sort of new attitude. And I think if those sort of cease to be addressed, and if sort of the so-called sort of elite ruling class fails to sort of address those concerns, then I mean we're sort of on a path to sort of global ruin, right?
Yes, correct.
and the sort of
Yeah.
the rising geopolitical
Yeah.
tension and sort of
Yeah, I mean, we've gone to more of a bigger picture here, and it's good that we have.
Yeah.
But I think it's best that we anchor ourselves back to whether Britain should go for a hard or soft Brexit
Yeah.
and the implications of Brexit as a whole. And I think it's good that we talked about globalization and how people view it. But how can we change that now? How do we? So
Yeah.
if, let's say, worst comes to worst, there's a hard Brexit. Okay, what are the next steps for Britain? Should they negotiate trade deals with the Commonwealth countries? What should they do next? And what do you guys suggest that Britain would do?
Negotiate. Probably, like, obviously, the best resource Britain has available to it is, unfortunately, being a former empire with its Commonwealth. We have states like India, like South Africa, Australia, Canada, which have immense resources at their disposal. India, in particular, they have the sort of manpower. Now, how I talked to, they are coming to fill up service jobs, and later their kids are becoming doctors, lawyers, well educated, that sort of thing. India has, to me, it has India and Pakistan, the entire subcontinent, but it has like a sort of potential to like in terms of the highly educated people it offers, in terms of the it just because of the sheer population they provide a massive market opportunity, they provide a massive manpower opportunity, they provide doctors, lawyers, that sort of thing. So India would be a fantastic fallback for the UK, and really working to repair, perhaps to maintain good relationships with what is the fourth most powerful country on the planet is probably the most effective strategy Britain can take.
But
Right.
I think it's important to realize that India is not a cure-all to everything. There are some
I
things
agree.
from the EU that certainly cannot be replaced. You
Right.
cannot get
Right.
German machinery from anywhere in the world. So I think, I mean, yes, Britain has a fantastic fallback in terms of the Commonwealth. They can get humongous natural resources from Canada and Australia. They can get manpower from India and all of that.
Right.
But I think it's important that they remember who their neighbors are.
But
And-
Rohan, why do we need to know who our neighbors are? You talked about German machinery. Britain's economy is mainly based off of banking, the finance sector. We being Britain, we aren't a manufacturing country. The main economic kind of drawback will be companies leaving the UK as well as banks. I don't know if you've
Because
done any
of the
reading.
financial services that we can
Yeah, like if you've
offer
done reading on
the
like
single market,
on the EU, yeah, of course. And if you look at the EU bank passport, sorry to interrupt you, Priyanka, I just want to finish. If you look at the EU bank passport, one of the biggest things about the biggest qualms or biggest issues which Britain will have to address is somehow making sure that all the big banks don't end up leaving or shifting operations.
Where would they go? I just have a question. Like, this is just.
Well, no, they just have to set up new operations in different regions, because with the banking passport, what you can do is you can have your base of operations in one country, the UK,
Correct.
and then you have jurisdiction to operate in all the other EU countries, kind of like free movement. So
Right, yeah.
if we do leave the EU, we need to make sure that economically we keep ourselves sound by doing negotiations, signing trade agreements, which countries will sign, because the UK does benefit everyone else. It's not just like, oh, screw you, UK, we're butthurt about you leaving, to go on a very informal tangent. They will still need the UK. So it's stupid to think that everyone's just gonna screw over the UK because they're angry that they left the EU. I think
and I think there's sort of this discourse and discussion of sort of how will the EU punish the UK for leaving and all that. Well, I think that the very fact that that sort of discourse can exist, it's sort of a testament to sort of the ugly face the EU has sort of taken on, and sort of especially with the its new sort of austerity that it's been imposing on Greece now and sort of Spain. And I think again, sorry to bring it back to a big picture, but the EU has largely sort of become sort of a malicious, predatory institution, I think. And especially what it's done with Greece, I think is testament to that.
I personally think that I'm going back to the point on financial services. Well, two things. First, when it comes to international banks, they will not be particularly happy because, I mean, it is true that a lot of the banks were involved in some very predatory practices between 2001 and 2007. Well, the UK was their base of operations because in some cases, I mean, AIG Financial Products Division was based in London, not in New York City. Second, if you are considering that some of the largest banks in the United Kingdom are still in public ownership. They aren't private yet. I mean, they've been nationalized and their stock prices haven't recovered to pre-October 2008 levels. So then they aren't good. So then until then, they'll still remain under the government's ownership. So then when it comes to them leaving, I mean, HSBC or Barclays may have some considerations, but then the big regional players like RBS, Lloyds Banking Group, those banks certainly don't see much in the. I don't see much in the way of them really leaving the United Kingdom or the City of London at the moment. I think that the main issue is the UK has to really restructure itself back to manufacturing because financial services, I mean, as I mentioned, it'll take years and years, probably years, before the banks fully recover to be put back to the private sector. And I think that for that to happen, I mean, it'll take that to just give up years and years of economic growth, saying, okay, we'll solve the banking problem that's been plaguing us for like decades.
Okay.
And then,
right, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that manufacturing is one option. The next one would be probably technology is more on the software side. If you've heard about the UK's own Silicon Valley, Silicon Roundabout, as it's referred to, I think they have some real potential there. I think they could be offering some viable solutions to the Commonwealth, to the EU. So that's always another path that the UK could take.
Priyanka, oh sorry.
But then one of my major issues with that is that perhaps the migrants certainly do provide a good deal of, they provide adequate, how do I put it? Well, they provide, many migrants in some nations are the innovators, right? And then, I mean, there will be certainly a brain drain after Brexit because I think that the UK is only going to get more and more hostile towards these immigrants after Brexit because now they're out of the EU. Yeah. They won't be very open and welcoming, saying, "Oh, you're people here, so then we're just going to embrace you." Because I mean, the Leave campaign, I mean, more than economic issues, in my opinion, they've been focusing on migrant issues. We saw that famous advertisement of Nigel Farage's line of refugees. That's very indicative of the nature of the Leave campaign.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think to go back on what Rohan said briefly, when he talked about, you're not going to get German machinery that easily anymore and things like that. I think it's good that he brings that up. And why? Because we need to stop thinking about how it will harm the banks and whatnot, but we got to start thinking, as Nigel Farage would say, the real people, right? The normal people. And you have small businesses, small manufacturers who do rely on these goods from Europe to function and whatnot. And you have farmers who need their cars, their tractors, and whatnot, and all these tools and all that apparatus and whatnot needed to harvest and whatnot, all come from primarily Germany. And why is that? It's because there's preferential trade with Germany, and when the UK loses that, I think there's going to be a lot of difficulty for these small businesses to get labor, cheap labor, and two, get the resources that they need. And
Nigel, yeah, sorry, finish.
Go, continue.
I agree with you, but the thing is, and I brought that up earlier, is that why will Germany suddenly cease trade with the UK? I mean,
we're not saying cease trade. We're not saying cease trade. We're saying they're going to make it more difficult. They're going to make things more expensive.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
At the end, it's going to harm. It's going to harm the small businesses, and that's the problem here, right? And that's the price they pay. It's the people who voted, right? It's the what if a small business owner voted to remain, then what?
That's democracy.
He screwed himself.
No, but we can't accept that. You see, we can't just say that, right? The government is liable to everyone, not just the.
Yeah, of course.
You can never make everybody happy.
Not just the 51% of the people who voted to leave. The government is responsible to protect
and
the
exactly,
49% of the
large-
people who voted to remain. And when
and-
you fail to do that, that's when you see a government that's failing, which is exactly what's happening in the UK, and that is why it is best if the current government under Theresa May wants to remain in power, that they go for a soft Brexit, because they should not marginalize and forget about the people who voted to remain. And that's what I have to say.
Yeah, and
Okay. Go ahead.
and so to that point, I think there's a necessity to not sort of begin thinking of Brexit and the referendum as sort of a legitimate. I mean, this may sound, I mean, not too great, but I mean, it's not to look at it as sort of a legitimate enactment of democracy or whatever, because it was largely sort of constructed, and it's largely sort of occurred on false pretenses, I think. And so there needs to be a lot of sort of government involvement and state intervention in sort of redesigning institutions as well as supranational institutions. I mean, especially the EU, to ensure that further referendums such as the one in Brexit does not happen elsewhere in Europe, certainly.
Right. I kind of want to address Nigel's point where he said that, like, listen, that 51% of people voted to leave, 49% of them voted to remain, and we have to look at the small businesses, what it'll do to. And actually, Kurt was saying the same thing. We need to be looking at the impact on the small businesses. And, well, at the end of the day, what would you have us do? Like, we can try and push for a soft Brexit all we want, and in fact, that's probably what the Conservatives are going to do at the end of the day. But that's entirely dependent on how Germany, how Belgium, how well they feel like treating us. And at the end of the day, the EU was a bad deal. 51% of people voting for leaving it represent that. There was
misinformed voters.
Maybe it was just complete misinformation.
Misinformed, definitely
uneducated masses.
Wait, Nigel, wait. 1 second. I just want to say, but why don't we we look at history, right? Let's look at history like Priyanka likes to do. And we see that necessity drives innovation. And if we could take that and apply to a different kind of scope and an economic thing, the fact that we'll now need manufacturing to happen for lower class Britons, what's to say some young chav from London doesn't go and establish a tractor factory? What's to say that we don't see manufacturing start booming in England? What's to say that by stopping free trade?
If you're going to try to compete with manufacturing jobs like in China, then be my guest. But you need to see what the context is right now. And Britain, as you stated, these countries that aren't manufacturing countries like the US and the UK, they rely on strengthening their financial sectors, which is what the EU allowed them to do in a very fluid means. And now that that's gone, right, that now they're going to lose that status, it's going to be difficult for them. And if we're going to say that, okay, sure, if that happens, then we're going to expect Britain to be a manufacturing industrial center as it was in the 1700s, then I mean, I don't know if that's going to be the case, but
I mean, the EU, in my opinion, the EU has, to a certain extent, may put in place protectionist measures against the United Kingdom, but I don't think to a large extent. Like, I was actually happened to have the luck to read Guy Verhofstadt's book, which is about how Europe can save the world. It was published It was published in 2009. He actually, for all the radical opinions he has, for all the fact that Nigel Farage calls him, the EU is a temple and you're a god, then you're probably the high priest. Then, Verhofstadt still believes that protectionist measures is what caused Europe to sink into the long period of economic malaise that really is just an extension of 1975 to 2000, whatever. And because we won't know the end of it, he said that I think that the EU will put in place protectionist measures against the UK, but perhaps not to the extent to which some might have feared, because ultimately the EU's got to embrace free trade, because if it doesn't, then it's probably going to be in very, very big trouble. It's going to return back to the old cycle of, bringing competent.
Yeah, exactly. You're
right. And I think these protectionist measures are sort of very natural responses and inevitable responses to mismanaged attempts of economic integration. And again, that's what we saw in the 1930s. And it's when that sort of protectionism comes about, that isolationism comes about, and various other right-wing attitudes, and that's when sort of you spark geopolitical conflict.
I've never seen, like, from what I've seen, sorry if I'm speaking a bit odd here, but then countries that have put in place protectionist measures against each other have always become hostile. China, for example, put in place protectionist measures against Japan during the Depression. What happens next? We know that happened, but then in a more realistic extent, to say that, well, pardon?
Yeah, no, sorry, yeah. I mean, we'll have to wrap up soon. So if you have any concluding remarks,
So I think that for the purpose of political stability, the EU will probably not repeat, hostile relations and all the vicious cycle that follows. Perhaps for that reason, the EU may have that reason to push for a soft Brexit, not a hard one.
Also, I think one of the strongest cases for a soft Brexit is something like what Nigel said earlier, is that we need to prevent democracy from turning into a tyranny of the majority, right? This was a really, really, really close vote. And then you can make the argument that a lot of Brexit voters were misinformed. So the 50% of people, or nearly 50% of people that said they want to stay in the EU can't be ignored. When you not only leave your seats on the European Council, the European Parliament, but you also leave the EU single market, I mean, the people who voted Remain are going to be absolutely furious. A lot of Brexiters will also be absolutely furious because they didn't agree to pay a 5 to 10% tariff on the imported food that they get from Poland. So I think it's important to realize that there are definitely some advantages to being in the EU, like tariff-free trade with all of Europe, some of the biggest economies on the planet. So I think this sort of isolationist, populist view of Britain can be alone and Britain can manage itself is really, really deeply flawed. And what Britain needs to realize is that it does need the European single market, and it does need the rest of Europe to flourish in the way that it has economically over the last several hundred years.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to have to cut you off there. This is the end of our second episode of Let's Talk Politics, and we're here talking about Brexit. Feel free to join us next week on Saturday, 8:30 p.m. We'll be talking about the crisis in Syria. This is Nigel signing off.
This will be good.
Thanks, guys.